Taking a look at one of the other glaring needs on the Bucs roster and how they can address it, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credential member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, all one word, to get $50 instantly when you play $5. We have David Harrison doing some work for Locked On Bucs fans on Radio Row at the Super Bowl, and some more additions to the Buccaneers coaching staff. That is coming up in a little bit. But let's start with one of the other glaring needs on the Bucs roster, and that's cornerback. So I've been very vocal about my belief that Jamel Dean will not be on the roster next season. He has not lived up to the contract, and moving on from him would free up about $13 million in cap space this season, which the Bucs certainly need when it comes time to sign players, maybe make a trade, and that is something that had insider Reggie wondering about the cornerback position. So Reggie wrote in and he asked, with Dean probably leaving, is there any decent corners out there to complement McCollum? Or is the best way the draft? Probably free agency would determine where the first round pick goes, but how deep is the defensive class at positions of need? So the best bet is probably the draft, depending on how free agency shakes out. With that said, there are a couple of options in free agency, and here's how that could all shake out. If the Bucs sign or trade a top edge rusher, then the number one target in the draft is going to be corner. But if the Bucs trade or sign a corner, then the top draft target is going to be edge rusher. There's certainly a domino effect there that we won't have an answer to until that open negotiating window starts. But for the sake of the question, let's talk about the Bucs targeting a corner on the open market and who some of those targets could be. So first, I would think that the Bucs should be interested in Charvarius Ward. Ward spent 4 years with the Chiefs before playing in San Francisco the last 3 years. Not eye-popping interception numbers outside of 2023 when he had 5, but that was as many as the rest of his career combined. He's also coming off of a season where he was dealing with injuries, and according to PFF, it was the lowest graded season of his career. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, James, why would the Bucs want to sign a guy coming off of a bad year? Well, I'm going to tell you why. The injuries played a big part in that performance. Once he's back to 100%, you have an incredible lockdown guy opposite of McCollum for the next few years. Not only that, but it also means that his market value isn't going to be as high as it would have been if he had hit free agency after the 2022 or 2023 seasons. You could wind up with a bargain for his services. SpotTrack has his estimated market value at just over $15 million a year, but it may not get that high since teams will be concerned about injury and the performance in 2024. So that could wind up being one of those one-year prove-it deals or a shorter-term incentive-laden deal in hopes that he returns to form. Another guy that I would love the Bucs to take a look at is DJ Reed, who is entering free agency and trying to get as far away from the New York Jets as possible. Now, Reed doesn't fit the mold of a typical Todd Bowles corner, seeing as how he's only 5'9", which is really, really small. But I think his track record shows that he plays much bigger than his frame. The Jets gave him $11 million a year back in 2022. SpotTrack has his estimated value at around $14.5 million a year, which is less than Ward, but These are two expensive guys. However, you take a look at the cost and just know that if either one of those guys comes in, it makes the Bucs pass coverage light years better than it was last season. Of course, an elite pass rusher is also going to help that situation, but these guys are massive upgrades over Jamel Dean. Well, what about a little bit cheaper of an option? Not a lot of money to throw around before Greeny gets to work and starts to restructure some things and free up some cap. But instead of two of the top names on the market, how about someone that could be brought in for cheap, but also be extremely productive? And I'll tell you, I really like Brandon Stevens of the Baltimore Ravens. He's coming off his rookie deal, still very young. He fits the size profile for Bowles at 6'1", and he had a decent year with the Ravens. He's not on the level of Ward or Reed, but that's why his estimated market value is about half of theirs, according to SpotTrack. Now, his production dipped from 2023 to 2024, but overall, he is a starting caliber corner that can help McCollum. McCollum would be your number one in that situation, and that might make people a little weary, but it's likely the same thing if the Bucs pay big money for an edge rusher and then draft a corner in the first. On day one, Zyon McCollum would be your number one corner. Now, last season, Stevens started off the year on an absolute tear before going through a real bad stretch where he struggled against teams like Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Tampa. Some of that was injury related. He tried to play and fight through it. But that said, he's played in every game in a season outside of 2022. He started every game over the course of the last 2 years. So this isn't a guy that's in and out of the lineup like you have seen with Jamel Dean. You are going to be able to rely on him for 17 games a season. I think that in and of itself is incredibly valuable. As far as the draft is concerned, I'm going to keep hyping up Benjamin Morrison. This is a guy that should have been a top 10 pick this year until he had to leave the season in October and have hip surgery. That surgery is going to concern people. Now we're going to have to wait and see if he's healthy enough to participate in the scouting combine at Notre Dame's Pro Day before we really start to believe that he could be available at 19. If he's testing well and teams see that he's moving around with no problems, his draft stock is going to shoot back up. There's no question about that. But Morrison is an absolute dog. Against Ohio State in 2023, he completely shut down Marvin Harrison Jr., who was a top 5 pick in last year's draft. Harrison had 3 catches for 32 yards in that game because Morrison locked him down. It was Igbuka that had to carry the load in the receiving game. There was one game in all of 2023 where Morrison allowed more than 50 receiving yards when he was targeted. He allowed fewer than 50% of targets thrown his way to be completed. He's just an absolute machine. This past year, same thing before the injury. One game where he allowed 50 or more receiving yards, and it was exactly 50 yards that he allowed. Completion percentage under 45% when targeted. He had 5 interceptions as a freshman, 2 as a sophomore, none last year, but this guy is the real deal. Outside of him, Will Johnson from Michigan is not going to drop to 19. Neither is Travis Hunter, but honestly, I don't think Hunter is as good of a corner as some other guys in this class. He's a special kind of athlete, don't get me wrong, but he's not great at corner and he's not great at receiver. He's really good at both, but not elite at either. So you're going to look at guys like Jahdae Barron from Texas, who may slide out of the first round. But he wouldn't make it to the Bucs' second round pick. You have Trey Amos from Ole Miss. You have Shavon Revel from ECU. Those guys are in the same boat. They're probably early day 2 guys that are not going to fall to the Bucs in the second round. So you either reach for them at 19 or you trade back into the late first, even out of the first, into the early second to build up more draft capital and snag one of them there. We are going to hear more about those guys coming up in just a little bit. But then I do really like Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky as a second round option. He's not the lockdown guy that you're looking for right out of the gate, but he is a day 1 starter. He'll have some growing pains, probably a little bit of struggles early in the year. But long-term, you're going to have a really nice cover guy on the outside. Another day 2 guy that I'm really high on, and I'll talk more about him throughout the process, is Kobe Bryant from Kansas. That dude is going to be an absolute steal for someone on day 2 of the draft. He's one of the more impressive corners that I watched throughout the college football season. So we have David Harrison doing some work on Radio Row for all of you. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I remember last year's divisional round in Detroit being one of the loudest environments I have ever been in. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And while I wasn't going to be attending a playoff game, I did recently use Game Time Picks to find tickets to an upcoming concert. Browsing through the deals was simple. I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue, and the super deal that I got was especially impressive, offering the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. The new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. You got the Madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. You add in the Locked On local experts. You get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day, so make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. It is the hot news right now, of course, that Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland. I talked about it a couple of shows ago. I asked Evan about it on yesterday's show, but David Harrison caught up with our buddy and longtime friend of the show, Trevor Sikkema, on Radio Row at the Super Bowl and asked him about the Bucs pursuing Myles Garrett, as well as asked him about some names that Bucs fans should look out for in the draft early on in this process.
What's up, Locked On Bucs fans? David Harrison of Locked On Commanders. I know, I'm sorry. I miss you guys too.
You're a vet. It's fine.
You know who this guy is. I don't even need to tell you who this guy is. We got some Bucs questions for Trevor Sikkema of PFF. Trevor, first and foremost, big news of the week here outside of the Super Bowl, Myles Garrett.
Yes.
Everybody that needs pass rushers is talking about Myles Garrett.
Yes.
Every NFL team can use pass rushers. Like, there's not
course.
an NFL team that doesn't need pass rushers, right?
Right.
So the fit in Tampa and the cost, how do you see those things marrying?
Yeah, I mean, the fit is very easy for this team. I mean, he's a 4-3 defensive end. Not that he can't rush the passer in basically any point stance, but he's a 4-3 type of defensive end. They could use a hand-in-the-dirt pass rusher. There's no doubt about it. And so he is a fit to a T for exactly what Tampa would want and needs the most on that defense. There's no doubt about it. I just don't think Jason Licht's going to pay the price because we're talking about 2 first-round picks, probably a second-round pick, unless you could throw a player in there that's enticing for them. And if you're throwing in a player as a contender, are you making your team worse to get him? You know, how much of a net gain is it for Myles? Obviously, it's a high net gain, but I'm just skeptical. I'm skeptical of Jason, who came up through the scouting department. That's how he came into being a GM, because of how great of a scout he is. We've seen over the last 4 to 5 years, he's been one of the best drafting GMs in the NFL. And I just think he's going to be reluctant to move on from that many prized draft pick assets. So for Myles Garrett, I think a lot of people are saying to themselves, it's Myles Garrett. It's worth it. I just don't know if Jason's going to pay the price.
I mean, that's a big part of it, right? Is the willingness to pay that ransom. Senior Bowl just got finished. We got the Senior Bowl, then we got the Combine later. What's the latest on the draft class? Like, I know there's some areas where you guys think it's really heavy, really talented, but otherwise maybe a little bit thinner. Are those shifting at all? Or
I think that when you look at this draft class, a lot of people look at the fact that there's not like these home run, super hyped up prospects, and they go, oh, this isn't a good draft class. Yes, it is. It's just really good in back end of the first round all the way through the third round. I think this is a great draft class. Really deep at edge rusher, really deep at interior defensive line, deep at running back, deep at wide receiver, deep at tight end. Like, all those positions are deep. And we're going to see a lot of these guys make up the core parts of NFL rosters, in my opinion, for many years to come after this. It's just not that blue chip, ton of guys at the very top that you absolutely love, and you got to be okay with that. But the general managers that navigate the strengths of this draft and how it's set up can really set themselves up to continue to better their football team. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And then last one about the Buccaneers, given where they're drafting in the first round, give us like 1, 2, 3, however many names you want to give us that might be targets. And again, we're very early February, so this is going to change over time. But right now, if the draft were today, who are some names you're looking at?
Yeah, pass rusher. The dream is Mike Green for Marshall. Don't know if he makes it to 19, but I think the dream is to get him at 19 as a pass rusher there. Shamar Stewart and Nick Scorton, the two Texas A&M edge rushers, I think they would be great fits in Tampa as well. I love a guy like Donovan Ezeraku. Not so sure he goes in the first round, though. He might, if they go like corner or something in the first round, you might be able to get him a little bit later. Depends. They might have a wide receiver need depending on what happens to Chris Godwin, although, of course, Chris Godwin's going to be back. What am I saying? And then, you're looking at offensive line, but I think that's more of a mid-round need for them. Corner's a huge need for this team. We'll see if they believe a corner is worth it, because you got Will Johnson at the very top from Michigan. But after him, it's sort of like, okay, Ben Morrison I liked from Notre Dame, but he's coming off a hip injury, and so you're always wary of corners going through hip injuries there. Do you like Siobhan Revell enough, even though he's coming off an ACL injury? He's very, very talented, but do you feel good enough about picking him at number 19 coming off that ACL injury? Jahdae Barron, I think, is a great Todd Bowles type of a coverage corner. Yeah. Do you think that he can play full-time on the outside? He was an outside cornerback for the first time full-time this year. He was great at it, but do you think that that's his home at the NFL level? So those are a handful of guys. I look at pass rusher and I look at corner of where they're probably going to hone in on at number 19.
Absolutely, man. He's Trevor Sikkema. You already know him. You love him. David Harrison. I hope you still love me a little bit.
They do.
Take it back to James Yarcho. James, appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, David and Trevor, so much for that. Of course, David, we still love you. You are forever a part of Locked On Bucs history. But as far as how that video went down and some of the things that Trevor said, while I tend to lean towards Trevor's thought process on the price for Myles Garrett, it seems as though the cost may not be as much as I or others originally thought. So Diana Rossini, who does fantastic work for The Athletic, if you're not following her on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, you need to make sure that you're doing that. She does great, great stuff. But she tweeted out, quote, one NFL GM on what a trade for Myles Garrett would look like. Then she quotes this GM saying, probably a 1+. Can't wait for the it will be 3 1s crowd. That's not happening. A 1 and a 2 or a 1 and 2 3s. Throw a player in there. End quote. Look, if it's a 1 and a 2 or a 1 and 2 3s, get it done. You get it done now. Of course, a bidding war is going to drive the price up for sure, but you aren't getting an edge rusher in the first round that walks in and has the impact that Garrett does for the next 3 to 4 years. That prospect, that first round pick may turn into that. And I know everyone loves Mike Green. Trevor just mentioned Mike Green, but he's not coming in from Marshall to the NFL and ripping off 14 sacks next season. Myles Garrett will. This isn't going to be an everyday conversation, but we are going to talk about Garrett a lot over the coming weeks. I still don't think a deal gets done until after June 1st because of the cap situation, unless Cleveland decides that they would rather have a pick this year and they don't care about the dead money. So this isn't a deal that's going to break the minute the open negotiating window kicks off. There will be conversations in Indianapolis at the scouting combine because there always are, but the Browns have no leverage here outside of what other teams are bidding. Garrett wants out. That's been made public. There's no going back at this stage in the game. You're going to have to move on from him. As for whether or not Light will pay the price, I guess it all depends on what the price ends up being, how that bidding war unfolds. He's not going to have to pay the AFC tax. That certainly helps, but it may reach 2 firsts because of how late the Bucs pick this year and how late you would expect them to pick next year, especially if they're adding Myles Garrett to the roster. The other part of it is that Garrett and Baker didn't have the best of relationships when they were together in Cleveland. Back when Baker was traded to Carolina, Garrett referred to it as, their relationship as having some, quote, disagreements at a base level. And then Garrett called Baker a hell of a competitor and a great guy to have on your side. But that was about as far as it went. This likely stems from Baker not publicly having Myles Garrett's back when Garrett clocked Mason Rudolph in the head with his helmet back in 2019. This could all be water under the bridge. Garrett can easily see what Baker has done in Tampa. He can know that this is a team that he would want to go to because they can compete for a championship. But then again, maybe Jason Licht doesn't pull the trigger because he doesn't want to upset his franchise quarterback, and he's going to look to other avenues to pursue the pass rush. Some changes to the Buccaneers coaching staff. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make sure it's even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place to play daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, receptions, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has you covered. Again, over 10 million members and billions in winnings. It's clear that people absolutely love this platform. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, all one word. And you're going to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't need to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Wrapping things up here on the Locked On Bucs podcast. There's a couple of changes worth noting that we have not talked about on the show. One is because it just broke right before I started recording. So offensive coordinator Josh Grizzard brought in one of his former coaches to be the new pass game coordinator, and that is Kefense Hynson, or it might be Kefense Hynson. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the official pronunciation, so my apologies to Coach Hynson if I am mispronouncing that. But then the Bucs hired Charlie Strong as their defensive line coach, according to Ian Rappaport. So let's start with the most recent coaching hire in Charlie Strong. This is such a great hire by the Bucs. So Strong was the head coach of Texas and Louisville and USF before spending last season with Alabama as an analyst. Strong got his start with the Florida Gators way back in 1983 as a graduate assistant. That means that Charlie Strong has been coaching longer than I have been alive. I may be old, but oh my goodness, this dude has some experience. He moved on to Texas A&M and Southern Illinois before going back to Florida in 1988 as the outside linebackers coach. Then he goes to Ole Miss for a year before returning to the Gators in 1991 as defensive end coach before being moved to associate head coach and defensive tackles coach in 1994. He spent 4 years with Notre Dame as the defensive line coach. Then he was a defensive coordinator with South Carolina from 1999 to 2002. Then back to Florida again in 2003 as defensive coordinator. Then he was interim head coach of the Gators in 2004 once they fired Ron Zook, before serving as assistant head coach, co-defensive coordinator, and linebackers coach from 2005 to 2009. From there, it was off to Louisville as head coach from 2010 to 2013, then Texas head coach from 2014 to 2016, USF head coach from 2017 to 2019, defensive analyst for Alabama in 2020, Jacksonville Jaguars assistant head coach and inside linebackers coach in 2021, Miami Hurricanes co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach in 2022, then Alabama defensive analyst in 2023. Whew, I got to take a breath after all that. That is quite a resume and, dare I say, a strong replacement for Casey Rogers, who left to go to Detroit as their defensive line coach. It's okay. It's a bad joke. It's a dad joke. Enter rim shot here, but Strong was the only coach that Urban Meyer retained from the Ron Zook days at Florida, and he would go on to win 2 national championships as part of that Urban Meyer Florida staff. He would also win a national championship with Alabama in 2020. Strong has been part of some great defenses in college football, and he led Louisville to the biggest upset in BCS bowl game history beating Florida 33-23 in the Sugar Bowl when the Cardinals came in as 2-touchdown underdogs. Things didn't go so well for him in Texas. He left Louisville to go to Texas. He was fired after just 3 seasons. Then he goes to Tampa at USF and only lasted 3 seasons as their head coach. And look, his head coaching record and resume has nothing to do with his ability to help mold and develop great defensive units, where he has an unbelievable track record of defensive line and linebacker production at every stop that he's made. He was a big reason that the Florida Gators won 2 national championships in just 3 years. This is a marquee hire for the Buccaneers, and we could very well, maybe I'm putting the cart in front of the horse here, but we may very well be seeing a future Buccaneers defensive coordinator joining the staff this season. As for Hynson, he's been around for quite a while as well. Not as long as Strong, but he got his start in 2003 with Willamette as the assistant receivers coach. He was Grizzard's co-offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach at Yale, but most recently was with Oregon State. So Hynson joined Oregon State in 2018 as wide receivers coach and pass game coordinator. He was named interim head coach in 2023. And then last season, he returned to his role as receivers coach and pass game coordinator until he joined the Bucs staff last week. So the Bucs coaching staff, after making after a couple of changes, now they're really starting to come together. You lose Casey Rogers, you bring in Charlie Strong. You lose Liam Cohen, you promote Josh Grizzard, who brings in Kefense Hynson. I really, really like what they're doing here. I think both of these hires, if the Bucs have success in 2025, if they make a playoff run, I think we're going to be looking back at these hires and point to them as a big reason for that success in 2025. Still a lot of work left to go, still a lot of holes to fill on that defensive side of the ball, still a lot of moves that need to be made from a player standpoint, but they're off to a really, really good start after things went a little bit nutty a couple of weeks ago. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. Insiders, send in your mailbag questions. If you're not an insider, you should become one. But if you have questions for the show, go ahead and send them to the DMs on Twitter at Locked On Bucs. I will get to those as well. Of course, insiders, you guys get the fast track. I'm going to prioritize those. But please feel free to send in your questions on Twitter at the Locked On Bucs DMs. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.